Today, we are diving into the story of a titan. A real titan. A guy who clawed his way up from being a stateless refugee to becoming the undisputed king of the world's oceans. He had it all, the money, the power, the women. But in the end, he was completely shipwrecked by his own ambition. This is the absolutely incredible and ultimately tragic story of Aristotle Onassis. So our story, it actually begins at the end. I want you to picture this. You're in a silent, very exclusive clinic on the outskirts of Paris. You don't hear the roar of the Mediterranean waves, you can't smell Cuban cigars or fine cognac, nope. All you get is the quiet hum of machines and that kind of metallic taste in the air. And in a bed that looks way too big for his withered body, lies a man who once made entire governments tremble. And the irony of his final days, it is just brutal. Staggering. Think about it. Aristotle Onassis owned a fleet of ships larger than most nations. He had accounts in 217 different banks, and yet his own body was just shutting down systematically. He had this degenerative disease, myasthenia gravis, and it was basically unplugging his muscles one by one. It was like this final, cruel bill for an empire that he built on absolute ruthless control. So to really understand this guy, we have to go back, way back, to the single moment that created him. And it wasn't in some fancy boardroom. No, it was in the middle of a burning city. That's the moment that forged a vow deep in his soul. Never again would he be the victim. The speed of his rise is what's just incredible. Get this. In 1922, he loses literally everything. His hometown of Smyrna is burned to the ground. By 1930, he's just 25 years old. He's a millionaire. This wasn't just ambition, This was a desperate, scorched earth climb back from absolute zero. And when I say absolute zero, I mean it. This was his entire starting capital. $60. That's it. $60 that he had secretly sewn into the lining of his pants while he was fleeing his burning home. All he had was that $60 and this special passport for stateless people, which basically screamed to the world, this man belongs to no one. And with that, he got on a boat and sailed for Argentina. His first move? Oh, it was a masterpiece of pure cunning. So he gets the job as a nighttime telephone operator. But he wasn't just connecting calls, he was listening. That switchboard became his personal university of power. It's where he learned all the secrets of the businessmen. So he overhears them talking about this new trend for lighter blonded tobacco. He contacts his father back in Greece to send him some samples. He puts on a rented suit, and he just bluffs his way into the office of a huge cigarette mogul, pretending to be some wealthy heir. And guess what? It worked. He walks out with a $10,000 deal. And just like that, his empire was born. But tobacco? That was just the start. Onassis had this realization. He understood that the real money wasn't in making the stuff. It was in controlling how it got from A to B. He'd look out at all the ships in the harbor of Buenos Aires, and he didn't just see boats. No, he saw floating fortresses of wealth. And so he rewrote the entire rulebook for the shipping game. First, when the Great Depression hits and everybody is panic selling, what does he do? He's buying their ships for pennies on the dollar. Then he basically invents the idea of flags of convenience, registering his whole fleet in places like Panama so he could pay zero taxes and ignore all the labor laws. During World War II, while other people's ships were getting sunk, he's renting his tankers out to the Allies and making an absolute fortune from the war. And then, after the war, he pioneers the supertanker because he realized oil was the new blood of the world. And this next quote, wow, it really gives you a chilling look right into his soul. He was accused of violating international treaties because he was slaughtering thousands of whales down in Antarctica for their oil. His response? The whales don't vote and don't pay the taxes. Just cold, pragmatic, and totally ruthless. For Onassis, everything had a price tag. Morals? That was a luxury he just couldn't afford. So, okay, he's got the money now, he's got the power. But Onassis realized he needed something else. He needed social legitimacy, because he was still seen as this, crude upstart. So he started to acquire people with the exact same strategic coldness he used to acquire his ships. His first major acquisition was Tina Livanos. She was just 17, and she was the daughter of the most powerful shipping magnate in Greece. This marriage, it was his golden ticket, his key to the kingdom. But it also kicked off this lifelong, totally obsessive rivalry with a guy named Stavros Niarchos, who was a much more polished shipping tycoon. And what does Niarchos do? He immediately marries Tina's older sister. Their competition became the stuff of legend. If Niarchos bought a yacht, Onassis had to buy a bigger one. It was basically a decades-long war fought with tankers, private islands, and priceless art. And the ultimate symbol of this war? It had to be his yacht, the Christina O. I mean, get this. He bought a rusty old Canadian warship for scrap metal, paid just $34,000 for it, and then poured millions into turning it into a floating palace. We're talking gold-plated faucets, a mosaic swimming pool that could rise up and turn into a dance floor. And the most famous part? Bar stools upholstered with whale foreskin. Yeah, he actually loved telling his female guests they were sitting on the largest organ in the world. Real classy guy. You know, if you look at the three most important women in his life, it's almost like a series of strategic upgrades for his empire. First, Tina Lavanos. She gave him his entry into the elite club. Then came the famous opera singer Maria Callas. That was a wild, destructive affair that gave him a kind of cultural prestige. And finally, the ultimate trophy, Jackie Kennedy, the president's widow. Their marriage? Well, it wasn't a love story. It was a transaction, pure and simple. He got the ultimate status symbol, and she got a fortress of security built out of his billions. But here's the thing. Just as Onassis reached the absolute top, the pinnacle of everything, he owns the most famous women in the world, he's got the biggest shipping fleet, the private island. It's like the universe decided, okay, time to collect. And the bill that came due, it was something that no amount of money could ever pay. 15 seconds. That's it. That's how long it took for his entire world to come crashing down. On January 22nd, 1973, his son and his only heir, a 24-year-old named Alexander, took off in this little amphibious plane. The entire flight, from the moment the wheels left the ground to the moment of the crash, lasted just 15 seconds. But that was more than enough time to destroy a dynasty. And the cause? It was just a devastatingly simple mistake. A maintenance crew had installed the aileron control cables backwards. So the more Alexander tried to correct the plane's roll, the more it actually plunged towards disaster. I mean, the tragic irony is almost too much to bear. This is a man who owned an entire international airline, and he lost his only son to a basic mechanical screw-up on a runway that he himself owned. From that moment on, Onassis himself he started to die. People said the light just went out of his eyes. And then his own body started its own rebellion. He was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis. It's a disease where your own immune system attacks your nerve receptors. They call it the ragdoll disease because you literally lose all your strength. And for a man who was obsessed with control, this was the ultimate humiliation. I mean, just think about this image. The man whose gaze used to terrify bankers all over the world. He could no longer even hold his own eyelids up. He had to physically tape them open just so he could see. It was this grotesque mask of the man who was once a titan. And that brings us right back to where we started, that silent hospital room in Paris. The final balance sheet of his life was being drawn up. And it was pretty clear that despite all that immense wealth, he was dying completely bankrupt, both emotionally and physically. You know, one of his very last acts was a business transaction. Of course it was. This was the settlement amount he agreed to pay Jackie Kennedy, formally ending their contract and closing that chapter of his empire for good. His own wife found out he was dead while she was in New York. The titan who had possessed the entire world was leaving it completely and utterly alone. He was flown back to his private island, Scorpios, the paradise he had literally built from a barren rock. This island that he bought for practically nothing, now worth hundreds of millions of dollars, it became his tomb. He was laid to rest there, in a simple grave, right next to the son he couldn't save. So what's the takeaway from a life like this? I mean, Onassis won every single business battle he ever fought, but he treated love like a business deal and his family like assets on a balance sheet. In the end, he was a refugee all over again, not from a burning city this time, but from human connection itself, just stranded, all alone on an ocean of gold. So the final question, the one his life really asks us, is this. If you had to sacrifice every personal connection you have to conquer the world, would it be worth it?